Gun crime, especially in Johannesburg, concerns all. But now that you could download and 3D print your own gun, the question is who will take control? An American company now posts freely available plans online to 3D print automatic firearms. We engage with a legal expert on this matter in Insight just after this bulletin. Women across the country will unite and take to the streets today in the fight against gender-based violence. The total shutdown will see thousands of women march in the country. Feminists and gender activists are calling on women and gender non-conforming people in South Africa to participate in the nationwide march. Members of the public have been urged to wear black with a touch of red to show solidarity. Here's more on the new 3D print-your-own-gun technology. Martin, welcome. It's great to have a legal mind in studio on this new technology that's out with regards to 3D gun printing. Currently, how strict is firearms law in South Africa?
We have very good laws, but there's a difference between the law itself and how it's implemented and how it's policed. 3D gun printing in the South African legal context would be illegal in at least 3 different senses. It's illegal to manufacture a firearm without a manufacturer's license. It's illegal to possess a firearm without a license. And it's illegal to be in possession of a firearm without a serial number. And those are the most serious offences in terms of the Firearms Control Act.
So there are serious concerns here around 3D gun printing?
I think we need to separate the fact from some of the hype about 3D gun printing, because it's possible to print a 3D gun just like it's possible to print a 3D musical instrument, but it doesn't mean that the gun will function or the musical instrument will make music. We have to interrogate it a little bit more closely than that, because the actual technology does not necessarily mean that it will result in a functioning firearm. You have to look at the process, you have to look at the materials, and you have to look at the cost of actually making a 3D object. If you look at the materials, we currently are using plastic as part of the technology. Plastic is not the right material to make a firearm out of. While it is possible, you are probably going to injure yourself at some point, because a firearm is a miniature pressure vessel. So when you fire a round of ammunition, you create this massive burst of pressure that has to be contained. Otherwise, it will blow up and it will injure the person using it. And plastic is not as strong as steel.
Sure. So it won't work on plastic?
It won't work on plastic.
So in other words, you're saying there are no concerns there because firstly, it won't work on plastic, and secondly, the procedure for manufacturing a 3D gun still has to be followed in terms of legislation?
Let's take the legislation out of it and focus on the technology. Firearms are made of metal, of good quality metal, and there's a reason for that. To make a 3D firearm out of metal or some metal parts, and some metal parts are critical for it to function properly. But then you have to look at the cost of the technology as well. We're not talking about buying an off-the-shelf product and plugging in it at home in a domestic outlet and you can make a gun. It's a lot more complicated than that, and it's very, very expensive. So if a person who wanted to procure functioning firearms illegally had the choice between using the current technology or buying firearms illegally from another source, it would be cheaper by a long margin to go and buy firearms from another source. So concerns about the actual manufacture of firearms at home in a domestic environment, I think they're a little bit premature.
Sure, but there would be legitimate concerns around a crime syndicate that can afford to get hold of this technology to manufacture it by itself.
But in your question is the answer, because you talk about a criminal. Now, a criminal is never going to obey a law, because by definition, a criminal is someone that doesn't. So we have to distinguish between what the law says and who is going to obey those laws. We're never going to stop criminals from doing criminal acts. The idea of passing laws is to regulate something. But if someone or something does not want to be regulated, then it becomes virtually impossible to
So I suppose the
control
right question would be, does this technology make it easier for criminals to actually manufacture their own guns?
Not now. It's possible that technology could change, but the current state of the technology makes it impractical, very impractical. If I can also just add as well,
Sure.
there's a lot of attention being paid to blueprints of a firearm. There's been some court cases in America where you can take the blueprint off the internet and you could, in theory, go and make a firearm. I can go and buy a book from a book retailer that's got blueprints in it for firearms as well. The blueprint in itself is irrelevant. It's a manufacturing process. And as the technology stands, it's easier to manufacture a firearm out of metal with the right machinery than it is to 3D print it.
Sure. Being someone that played a very important role in actually writing up the firearm legislation in South Africa, given that this technology is now available, should South Africa move quickly in the direction of relooking at the current legislation to take into account this new technology?
Again, I think we need to distinguish between the legislation and the enforcement of it. Passing more legislation is not going to solve any problem, let alone this specific
Sure.
problem. And we have to ask ourselves, does the current legislation accommodate this? And the answer is unequivocally yes. And we must bear in mind that the more complicated we make legislation, the more easy it is to interpret it in different ways and for it to be enforced in different ways. So rushing out and making more complicated laws is not a solution. We actually need simpler laws, a better understanding of those laws, and most importantly, better enforcement.
Sure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.